Have you ever felt like nothing you do really matters? Like life has turned into an endless loop without purpose? Wake up, work, consume, repeat, all wrapped in empty promises of happiness. You're not alone. We destroyed the meaning of life. In the name of progress, productivity, and the perfect image, we buried silence, depth, and the simple act of existing. In this video, we'll dive into the philosophy of the void with Camus, Kierkegaard, Viktor Frankl, and other thinkers to understand how we lost our sense of meaning and whether it's still possible to rebuild it. If you feel like you're living on autopilot or that something's missing, stay until the end. Every day, before we even realize what we want, someone, or rather something, has already decided for us. What we'll listen to, what we'll watch, what we'll wear, what we'll buy. Apps recommend our friends, movies, quick replies to messages, routes to work, and even people we might want to date. The promise is clear: comfort, speed, optimization. But what no one tells you is what's being traded for that supposed efficiency. Slowly, without noticing, we hand over essential choices of our existence to systems that have no consciousness, no morality, no purpose, only data, and that's where the void begins. An algorithmic void. It's not the same as boredom or loneliness. It's silent, almost invisible. It doesn't hurt right away, but it eats you from the inside. It's the hollowing of human experience when we give up choice, doubt, hesitation, and reflection, in exchange for smart recommendations that think for us. Albert Camus once said the absurd is born from the clash between our human desire for meaning and the silence of the universe. Now, that silence doesn't come from the cosmos anymore. It comes from the cold code that quietly runs our lives. Algorithms don't know what love, pain, loss, or desire are, yet they dictate what we should feel, buy, follow, and value. And the more we follow their suggestions, the more we lose the ability to ask why we do what we do, when our most intimate decisions are no longer ours. Choosing a song used to be a simple act. Now it's a weekly discovery, calculated by patterns we don't even know. Taste becomes a product of recommendation. Curiosity is shaped by trends. Love by a match. When we outsource our moral, aesthetic, and emotional choices, we begin to mold ourselves around criteria that don't come from within, but from pre-made data, adjusted by companies that don't really know us. They just track us. It's not that AI explicitly forces us down a path. What it does is subtler. It empties the need to think deeply, to wrestle with doubt, uncertainty, and the responsibility of choice. And without that responsibility, what's left of freedom? The meaning of life is a choice, one that can't be automated. Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote in Man's Search for Meaning that life always asks each person what their purpose is. And it's up to each of us to answer, not with words, but with actions. But how do we answer when even our most intimate actions are suggested by impersonal systems? If we hand over the steering wheel of our existence to something without consciousness, who are we in this process? The danger of the algorithmic void is exactly this. It convinces us that we're making choices when we're only reacting to suggestions. The feeling of autonomy remains, but deep freedom, the freedom to decide who we are, is being drained away. Life without effort becomes a simulation of existence. South Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han warns us about this. We live in an age where everything is designed to eliminate friction. Effort has become a flaw. Waiting is an obstacle. Taking time to think is seen as a waste. But what's left of being human when there's no more effort? When everything is handed to us, pre-digested, pre-planned? Existence can't be lived like a menu of pre-programmed choices. It requires confrontation, the discomfort of not knowing, of making mistakes, of contradiction. What gives depth to experience isn't efficiency, it's intensity. And artificial intelligence, no matter how useful, can never live in our place. The algorithm can predict your clicks, but never your dilemmas. AI is powerful. It can predict patterns with frightening accuracy, but it doesn't understand. It doesn't suffer. It doesn't desire. It doesn't exist. It only operates. And the risk is that we start mirroring that same logic in ourselves. We become more predictable, more segmented, more sellable, exactly as the systems want us to be. Life stops being an open field of possibilities and becomes a continuous flow of commands and responses. But is that truly living, or just simulating life based on what's been suggested to us? Albert Camus, when reflecting on the absurd, didn't conclude that life was meaningless by nature. He concluded that even without ultimate answers, rebelling against the void is the most authentic stance we can take. In other words, in a world that automates everything, the greatest act of freedom is to resist. Resist the impulse to outsource everything. Reclaim choice as a radical act. Ask yourself, is this really what I want, or just what was suggested to me? The philosophical question isn't whether algorithms are useful. They are. The question is, are they replacing the reflection that once helped us find meaning? And if they are, what are we losing in exchange for convenience? There is an antidote to the algorithmic void, but it's counterintuitive. It's not about unplugging from technology entirely. It's about regaining control over where we place our attention, creating pauses, questioning what's automatically offered, choosing more slowly, leaving space for the unexpected, for what wasn't programmed. In a world where everything is calculated to maximize engagement, reflection itself becomes an act of rebellion. We don't need to reject artificial intelligence, but we must remember that it can never and should never replace our search for meaning. Because the meaning of life can't be suggested by an algorithm. It can only be discovered by you. We now live on a stage that never closes its curtains. The lights never go out. The audience never leaves. In the age of social media, we are constantly performing, even when we think we're just living. It doesn't matter what we do. Wake up early, read a book, work out, meditate, work, travel. Everything is turned into content, into social proof, into a marketable story. What once was simply a moment of life has now become a performance before an invisible but ever-present audience. South Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han called this the society of performance, an era where the individual is no longer exploited by an external boss, but by themselves. We've become slaves to our own need to prove our worth, and that slavery comes at a high cost, the exhaustion of the self, the tyranny of positivity, and the cult of productivity. We've never been so encouraged to be our best selves, to chase success, focus, and high performance. But behind this motivational talk hides a constant pressure to always be more productive, more attractive, more inspiring, more engaged. It's a race with no finish line. And the cruelest part, no one is forcing us. It's a prison without bars, exhaustion without a visible oppressor. Byung-Chul Han points to this as a deep shift in modern power. In the performance society, the subject exploits itself and believes it is achieving fulfillment. In other words, we wear ourselves out thinking we're becoming free. But deep down, we're just replacing old external control with an inner, constant self-surveillance, fueled by social comparison and the unreachable ideal of perfection. Kierkegaard and the despair of not wanting to be yourself. Long before social media, philosopher Søren Kierkegaard diagnosed a deep human anguish, the despair of not wanting to be oneself. For him, the worst kind of despair wasn't visible pain. It was the attempt to escape from oneself, adopting a false, superficial identity shaped to please others. Today, that idea feels more relevant than ever. We build digital selves, carefully edited, filtered, and curated. We post what makes us look good and hide what makes us vulnerable. And little by little, we start to believe we are that character. But something inside us knows the truth. That gap between the real self and the projected self creates a silent emptiness. a constant feeling of inadequacy, falseness, and fatigue from maintaining an image that doesn't match real life. Kierkegaard would call this modern despair, a self that has lost contact with its own inner being. When life becomes a showcase, the self becomes a product. Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, all of them train us to see life as a form of personal marketing. Every post is a presentation, every story a chance to stay relevant. We've become our own brand managers. But the problem is, the self wasn't made to be a product. A human being doesn't fit into a feed and can't be reduced to engagement metrics. In constantly trying to prove value, we distance ourselves from real experience. We lose spontaneity. We live thinking about how what we're doing will look, not how it feels. The present becomes just a trampoline for external validation. Exhaustion comes from within, and no one notices. The fatigue we feel isn't just physical. It's existential exhaustion. With every new attempt to show we're doing great, happy, and productive, we feel emptier inside. Because deep down, even unconsciously, we know we're living to appear, not to be. Byung-Chul Han calls this neuronal violence. It's not the violence of repression, but of self-exploitation. The performance subject is both the aggressor and the victim, and this violence is invisible. It doesn't scream, but it consumes. It doesn't imprison, but it convinces us that freedom means showing ourselves, always, all the time. But how long can we sustain this performance? The collapse of the self and the return to inner life. Kierkegaard said true freedom can only be born when a person faces themselves with honesty. That requires silence, time, introspection, depth. But the world around us is designed to keep us distracted. We live turned outward, toward likes, numbers, and others, and forget to look inward. The result? The inner self dissolves. What's left is just a reflection, a display, an image. And the void settles in, not because life lost its meaning, but because we stopped inhabiting ourselves. Byung-Chul Han writes, "What's missing today is not attention, it's contemplation, and maybe that's what we need to reclaim. The ability to be silent, to do something without sharing it, to live something without turning it into content, to simply be, without needing to prove. The way forward is not to disappear, but to reconnect. It's not about abandoning social media or demonizing technology, but about redefining our relationship with our own image. Do we really need to record everything? Does the value of what we live depend on how many people saw it?" Kierkegaard called for a return to individual singularity, not as an escape from the world, but as a reconnection with one's essence, to be who you are, with courage and imperfection. In practice, that might mean posting less, living more, talking less about productivity and more about presence, less comparison, more compassion, less best version, more truth, because no one can sustain an infinite performance, and the price for trying is far too high, the loss of yourself. God is dead. With those words, Nietzsche wasn't celebrating the destruction of religion. He was announcing a deep crisis, the loss of humanity's ultimate source of meaning. For centuries, the idea of God supported our values, moral compass, and sense of purpose. But in modernity, that structure collapsed. What was left? An abyss, a silence, a void. And that's exactly where we are today, but not in silence. We're laughing at it, sharing memes about it, mocking our suffering, our confusion, our lack of purpose, turning the absurd into a joke. It's nihilism with an ironic filter and a pop soundtrack. When life becomes a meme and the void becomes a joke on social media, it's common to see people, especially younger generations, posting phrases like, "Not sure what I'm doing with my life," "anxious, depressed, broke, but looking good," "Today I just want to sleep for 300 years," all paired with emojis, funny filters, or ironic soundtracks. Existential pain is disguised as humor. Suffering gets diluted in irony. It's as if we were telling the world, Yes, I'm falling into the abyss, but look how gracefully I fall. Nietzsche called nihilism a dangerous but necessary stage, a phase where all supreme values collapse and life loses its inherited justifications. He believed nihilism could be a bridge, not a destination, but today it feels like we've stopped halfway across that bridge. We've accepted the void as inevitable, and instead of crossing it, we laugh at it. Irony as existential anesthesia. Irony is one of the most powerful weapons in modern culture. It allows us to say uncomfortable truths without emotionally committing to them. When someone posts a self-deprecating video saying, "My life's a total mess, but whatever, I'll laugh about it," what's really happening there? It's an attempt to endure the absurd without diving into it. A way to keep distance from pain, to keep living, even without deeply believing in anything. Nietzsche wrote that when ideals die, humans must create new values, but that requires courage, confrontation, and responsibility. And often, it's easier to laugh at the ruins than to rebuild something real. The meme aesthetic, irony, absurdity, detachment, acts like philosophical morphine. It soothes, but doesn't heal. It eases the anxiety, but blocks transformation. Pop culture as a temple of stylish emptiness. Look around. Our music, movies, series, and viral videos all reflect this spirit. Shows like BoJack Horseman, Rick and Morty, Fleabag, and even The Office present lost, cynical characters disillusioned with existence. They don't believe in anything, and that's exactly why they make jokes about everything. It's as if pop culture were saying, the world makes no sense, so let's laugh before it destroys us. This is Nietzsche's crystallized nihilism, not the tragic kind that pushes us to the bottom, but a stylized one, colorful, shareable, ironic, with an indie soundtrack and snappy editing. But pop nihilism doesn't take us beyond the crisis. It keeps us inside it, joking about the void instead of facing it. The fear of taking life seriously. In a world where everything becomes content, seriousness has become a risk. Being authentic, deep, or emotional can seem cheesy, dramatic, or cringe. So, to survive socially, we wear the armor of irony. We turn suffering into aesthetics. We pretend it's fine to laugh at the chaos, when deep down, we're crying for help. Nietzsche saw nihilism not only as collapse, but also as birth, the point where, after the death of God, humans could reinvent themselves as creators of new values. He called this the Übermensch, the overman, who standing before the abyss dares to create meaning. But that courage takes more than sarcasm. It demands depth, commitment, and action. And today, what we see is a generation drowning in skepticism, afraid to dream, to love, to believe, for fear of looking ridiculous. Mocking the void doesn't fill it. The aesthetics of absurdity, self-deprecating humor, laughing through pain, they all have value. Laughter is a form of resistance. It's a way to not lose our minds in the face of suffering. But when laughter becomes the only response to emptiness, it turns into denial. Denial of pain, of doubt, of the need to build authentic meaning. And worse, repeated daily, this humor normalizes the void. It convinces us that life is just that, a funny, hopeless mess, and that any attempt to search for something deeper is naive. Nietzsche never preached resignation to nihilism. He saw it as a battlefield, a chance to destroy decaying values and build new ones, more intense, alive, and human. The transition that must happen. The challenge of our time isn't to deny nihilism. It's everywhere. On our screens, in our songs, in our own words. The challenge is not to stop there. It's to use this crisis as fuel, to turn laughter into action, irony into reflection, memes into metaphor, and metaphor into real movement. Pop culture can be more than the aesthetic of emptiness. It can become a language of transformation, if we have the courage to cross the abyss. Nietzsche ends the gay science with the idea of the eternal return. What if you had to live this same life, with all its emptiness and pain, over and over forever? That question isn't a punishment, it's an invitation, a call to live in a way that you would want to live again. And that's only possible if you face the void, not with sarcasm, but with depth. We live in an age where boredom seems to have been erased from existence. Waiting in line, sitting alone in a room, staying in silence, things that were once normal have become almost unbearable. All it takes is a second of stillness before we grab our phones, swiping up, down, sideways, searching for something to pull us out of inertia. But is this really the end of boredom, or just a new way to escape it while it quietly grows inside us? Distraction as anesthesia. What we have today isn't a lack of stimulation, it's an overload of it. Social media, streaming platforms, apps, notifications, and endless feeds never let us be alone, not even for a moment. We wake up and check our phones. On the way to work, we put on headphones. During lunch, we scroll through short videos, funny, shocking, informative, absurd. Before bed, we do it again, just to make sure no second goes unfilled. But what feels light, fun, and harmless hides an existential trap. We're constantly distracting ourselves, so we don't have to face what's really inside. Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl wrote in Man's Search for Meaning that humans don't suffer only from trauma or illness, but from a deep existential emptiness that appears when life lacks purpose. He warned, man is not destroyed by suffering, but by suffering without meaning. We flee from boredom and fall into the void. In our attempt to avoid boredom at all costs, we've built a world where everything is just a tap away. But we've forgotten that boredom serves a vital psychological purpose. It's the space where reflection begins. It's in boredom that the mind starts to think deeply, to create, to question, to feel. Without boredom, there is no pause. And without pause, there is no mental digestion. What happens to a body that keeps eating non-stop? It swells, it gets sick, it loses the ability to absorb what matters. The same happens to the mind. The infinite scroll is like an endless feast, visual, auditory, emotional. But deep down, we're starving. Because stimulation isn't nourishment. Being busy isn't the same as being alive. There's a dangerous modern illusion that being busy all the time means you're full of life. But being busy, jumping from video to video, task to task, content to content, doesn't mean we're living with purpose. It just means we're avoiding silence. Frankl emphasized that humans need meaning more than they need pleasure. He didn't deny the value of entertainment or fun, but he insisted that what sustains life isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of direction. And what do we see today? Millions of people trapped in hyper-connected, overstimulated routines, informed, distracted, yet profoundly lost. That constant fatigue, chronic dissatisfaction, diffuse anxiety, all are symptoms of a void we've pushed just below the surface. Boredom as compass, not enemy. We need to reclaim the value of boredom, not as something to fight, but as a signal that there are unanswered questions within us. When life loses its natural rhythm of pause, waiting, and contemplation, it becomes a non-stop stream of stimulation, but without roots. Frankl said that meaning can't be invented, it must be discovered. And discovery takes time, silence, and inner listening. Boredom is the crack through which the unconscious knocks. It's in boredom that new ideas, insights, and deep questions emerge. It's in the quiet spaces that we finally hear ourselves. Why are we so afraid of silence? Maybe because silence forces us to face what we've been avoiding. And what we're avoiding is the most important question of all. Why am I living? Not, what should I watch next? Or, what's trending now? But, what is my role in this world? Frankl believed that every person is unique, and that only you can answer the question that life asks of you. But that takes courage. And often, we'd rather keep scrolling than dive into ourselves. Nietzsche once said, Most people don't really want freedom, because freedom involves responsibility, and responsibility is frightening. In today's world, that freedom has been replaced by constant entertainment, and without realizing it, we're trading purpose for distraction. The acceleration of the world and the disappearance of the self-philosopher. Byung-Chul Han adds to this critique, saying we now live in a society of fatigue. We're always running, always connected, always doing, but never being. The infinite scroll is a perfect metaphor for that. It never ends, never satisfies, never answers anything, but it keeps going. It's the image of a life that moves, but never deepens. We're drifting further from the core of existence, replacing it with colourful, fast, exciting surfaces that are ultimately shallow, breaking the flow, recovering the human rhythm. The way out isn't becoming a disconnected monk or rejecting technology. It's about recovering life's natural rhythm, making space for boredom, allowing it to appear, facing it as a guide, not an enemy. Simple practices can help. Walk without your phone. Eat in silence. Spend 10 minutes doing nothing, just observing. Resist the urge to grab your phone every time there's a pause. It seems small, but it's revolutionary because it reconnects us with what we've been losing. The ability to be present, to feel, to notice what's alive within us. Boredom as a portal to meaning. In the end, boredom isn't the problem. The problem is what we're doing with it. We're numbing it, silencing it, running from it. And that's what costs us most. When embraced, boredom becomes a doorway to truth. It's the space where creativity, insight, and transformation are born. Frankl said that humans don't need ready-made answers. They need responsibility toward their own freedom, and that freedom begins with a simple choice: to stop, to feel, to listen, to reflect. Life doesn't have to be a non-stop stream of stimulation to be worthwhile. It just needs meaning, and meaning reveals itself in the silence between the noises. Find your purpose. Discover your life mission. You were born for something greater. These phrases are everywhere, in ads, motivational videos, podcasts, and posts with orange backgrounds and bold white letters. They promise quick answers to one of the oldest and deepest human questions. Why am I here? In a world obsessed with productivity, goals, and personal development, the meaning of life has been turned into a marketable product. Quick, practical, wrapped in catchy phrases, and sold in online modules. The inner journey has become a sales funnel. Purpose as performance today. Finding meaning in life isn't just an existential quest. It's a social expectation. It's as if, to deserve a place in the world, you must have clear answers to everything. Who you are, what you want, where you'll be in 5 years, and of course, how you'll monetize it. But does life really follow that script? Is meaning something you can find, like downloading a new app? The more superficial side of the coaching culture sells this idea that everyone has a hidden purpose waiting to be unlocked, like a treasure map, and that once you find it, life will magically fall into place. But reality isn't like that. Life is full of breaks, doubts, contradictions, and uncertainty. No three-step method can handle all that. Albert Camus and the refusal of easy answers. French philosopher Albert Camus dedicated his work to confronting this lack of meaning. For him, human life is marked by an inevitable clash, the desperate desire for meaning and the indifferent silence of the universe. He called this conflict the absurd. Faced with it, Camus didn't offer salvation or motivational advice. He wrote, "There is no fate that cannot be surmounted by scorn." That line isn't nihilistic. It's an act of courage. Camus believed that facing the absurd doesn't allow for cheap comfort. To confront the void requires lucidity, and lucidity hurts. It hurts because it forces us to accept that there are no guarantees, no ready-made formula. While self-help coaching tries to convince us that everything has a positive reason, that suffering brings lessons, failure is just a step forward, and everything will eventually align, Camus invites us to face the possibility that maybe there's no inherent meaning at all. and even so, to live with dignity. The commercialization of meaning. The problem with coaching culture isn't the encouragement of self-knowledge. The search for meaning is legitimate, necessary, and profoundly human. The problem is when that search becomes a commodity. In that model, meaning becomes a product. It must have a name, an action plan, a visual identity, and a 30-second pitch to make it sellable. It's the fast food logic applied to the soul. Quick, pretty, aesthetically appealing, but empty inside. Worse yet, it creates anxiety in those who haven't found their purpose yet, as if they're behind in some existential race. Meaning stops being a lifelong construction and becomes a short-term goal. Those without a purpose are seen as lost, stuck, or failures. And ironically, that feeling of inadequacy becomes a trigger to sell even more courses, programs, and life transformations. Coaching isn't the villain, but it can be a dangerous placebo. It's important to make a distinction. There are serious professionals in the coaching field who know their limits and work responsibly. But what's at stake here is a market trend that turns existential fragility into profit. Superficial coaching, the kind that packages cliches in colorful slides, works like emotional placebo. You feel relief for a few days, you think you have direction, but there's no real depth. Soon, the anxiety returns stronger, because the essential questions were never actually faced. The person wasn't heard. They were guided through a pre-written script where everyone must reinvent themselves, make it happen, and wake up at 5 a.m. to win. But what if the meaning of life isn't about winning? What if meaning isn't something you have, but something you live? The risk of turning life into a marketing project. The consequence of this mindset is clear. We start living as if we were companies. We build narratives about ourselves. We sell our identities as personal brands. We measure our progress in charts and metrics. And we forget that life isn't a straight line of constant growth. There are losses, there are collapses, there are voids that serve no purpose, teach no quick lesson, they simply hurt. And all of that is also part of existence. When we reduce the meaning of life to a performance trajectory, we risk stripping away the depth of the human experience. Camus wrote, "The truly serious man is he who faces the absurd and continues to act as if he had hope. Waiting for a magic formula is denying the absurd. Facing the void without anesthesia, that's real courage." Life as creation, not as an answer. Meaning can't be found in a weekend course. It's built slowly, through choices, relationships, and ruptures. It shifts, it escapes, sometimes disappears, and then reappears somewhere else. Camus believed that even without an objective meaning, humans can create value simply by living. Meaning isn't given, it's created, and that requires something no coaching program can sell: time, silence, doubt, presence. It's through pain, love, care, freedom, honest work, and the confrontation with death that meaning begins to emerge, not as a slogan, but as lived experience. Be careful with those who promise. Quick meaning. The appeal of superficial coaching is easy to understand. We're tired, lost, and hungry for direction. But it's precisely in those moments of fragility that we need philosophy, not marketing. Camus, Frankl, Kierkegaard, and many others showed that meaning is built in the confrontation with reality, not in the escape from it. And when we turn that search into a product, we kill its very essence. Have you ever felt like you're behind in life? Like you're supposed to do something big, be someone important, leave a legacy, even if you don't really know what that means? That silent feeling has a name: purpose anxiety. In a time where everything is shared, measured, and compared, simply existing doesn't feel like enough anymore. You're expected to be special. Just living isn't enough. You have to make a difference, have a cause, start a business, launch a project, change the world, be remembered. But the harder you try to find this supposed unique purpose, the more lost you feel. Because deep down, it seems like everything has already been done, said, or lived by someone more charismatic, successful, or interesting than you. That's modern anguish. Not the lack of possibilities, but the excess of them. Freedom as a burden philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, in Being and Nothingness, wrote that humans are condemned to be free. For him, there's no predefined essence, no fixed destiny, no divine plan waiting to be fulfilled. We are free, radically free, to choose who we become. But that freedom, instead of feeling liberating, can be unbearable, because with it comes total responsibility for your own existence. There's no one else to blame, not outside, not inside. You aren't something by default. You make yourself with every choice, and that's terrifying. In a world without ready-made answers or objective meaning, each person must create their own path. And create doesn't mean simply finding a career that fits your interests or an inspiring mission. It means building meaning out of nothing, every single day. That freedom can generate what Sartre called existential anguish, the vertigo that comes from infinite possibilities and zero guarantees. And that's exactly our generation's dilemma. The cult of originality and the fear of being ordinary. We're taught to believe that every person has a unique mission in life. Social media amplifies that idea. Every day we see people living their dreams, starting non-profits, building startups, publishing books at 22, traveling the world with purpose, looking completely fulfilled. The message is clear. You should be doing something amazing too. And if you're not, something must be wrong with you. That's where purpose anxiety is born. The feeling that life only matters if it's grand, recognized, and exceptional. But what if it's not? What if you never create anything that changes the world? What if your legacy is made of small, invisible acts, quiet affection, and honest work? Is that failure? Or have we just been sold a distorted idea of what meaning really is? The illusion that everything has to be big. In our obsession with being relevant, we've forgotten that most of life happens in the small things, in caring for the people you love, in showing up for work, even when no one claps for you, in listening deeply, in small acts of kindness, in quiet moments that hold life together. But we live under constant pressure from metrics, likes, achievements, comparisons. We've been taught to think of ourselves as brands, to seek differentiation, positioning, influence. And this affects even our search for meaning. We want our purpose not only to be true, but also to be marketable, inspirational, Instagrammable. That's why so many people fall into deep crises. Not because life is empty, but because it doesn't feel big enough compared to the unrealistic expectations we've placed on what it means to have a purpose. The exhaustion of always being special. The constant need to be unique is exhausting. We turn every decision into proof of our worth. Choosing a career, a cause, a relationship, everything becomes a stage for a bigger story, as if life were an epic film where we're the main character changing the world. But Sartre reminds us, there's no script. Existence isn't automatically epic. It's ambiguous, fragmented, contradictory. Meaning, in that sense, isn't something you find ready-made. It's born in your relationship with the world, in action, in involvement, even if those actions are simple, quiet, and unseen. As Sartre wrote, man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. There's no purpose waiting for you out there. There's only you, waiting for the courage to act, even without guarantees. How to find meaning amid the overload. That's the hardest question. How do we deal with the freedom to create meaning when it feels like everything has already been done? We live in the age of excess information, excess comparison, excess possibilities. And in that flood, every choice feels too small, too late, too insignificant. But we forget that meaning isn't about absolute originality. It's about commitment. You might be the 1,000th person to write a book, open a shop, study psychology, or help someone. But if you do it with authenticity, it's still unique. Because what makes something meaningful isn't its scale. It's your depth of engagement. Sartre would say that if everything's already been done, it doesn't matter. What matters is who you choose to be now, with what you have in the world you live in. Accepting freedom as an opportunity, not a burden. It's natural to feel afraid of freedom. It forces us to face our own responsibility, but it also gives us the chance to create something real, not to impress, but to live fully. Purpose anxiety fades when we stop chasing an epic mission and start building small, present acts of meaning. Meaning isn't a destination, it's a way of walking. It can be found in how you listen to someone, make a cup of coffee, write a sentence, or hold a moment of doubt. And most of all, it begins when you stop comparing yourself to the grand ideal and start committing to the real. You open your app. There are messages, notifications, updates, likes. Someone commented on your photo. Someone else shared a video you might enjoy. Your name shows up. Your face is there. And yet, strangely, you feel alone. We've never been so connected, and yet so isolated. That's the paradox of the digital age. We're surrounded by interactions but starved for presence. We multiply our connections but lose depth. We're constantly visible but rarely seen. This connected loneliness isn't an outer silence. It's an inner emptiness that grows, even amid the constant noise. Heidegger and the fear of being alone with one's own. Being philosopher Martin Heidegger, in Being and Time, described a phenomenon that seems to have predicted the era we live in. He spoke of the human being as a Dasein, a being that exists in the world and questions its own existence. According to Heidegger, one of our defining traits is finitude. We know we're going to die. We know time is limited. And that awareness creates anxiety. To avoid facing this, we throw ourselves into the external world. We run away from ourselves, getting lost in shallow activities, distractions, routines. Today, that escape has become more sophisticated. We don't just stay busy, we expose ourselves. We create edited versions of who we are. We turn existence into a profile, and we live more and more outwardly focused. Heidegger called this the fall into impersonality, when a person lives not as themselves, but as one lives. It's the mode of existence where we stop being the subjects of our own lives and start reproducing what's expected of us. And the digital environment magnifies that brutally. When the self becomes its own avatar. On social media, what we show of ourselves is a carefully chosen, filtered, rehearsed fraction. We create a character, a digital identity. We respond to algorithms, to followers' expectations, to engagement metrics. We post what's likable, admirable, safe, and little by little, we fade behind the image. You can have 1,000 followers and still have no one to really talk to. You can get hearts on every photo and still feel no real love. You can be seen all the time and still feel invisible. It's like being surrounded by reflections but having no contact, like screaming in a crowded room and no one truly hears you. Simulated recognition is not presence. Likes and followers simulate recognition. They light up your brain, release dopamine, and for a few seconds make you feel like you exist for someone. But these are shallow interactions with no commitment. They don't touch the being, as Heidegger would say. They only touch the surface. Human beings need real presence. Eye contact. To be listened to without judgment. Shared silence. Affection that can't be measured in numbers. But in the logic of social media, recognition became a metric, and intimacy became content. We post our vulnerabilities with poetic captions and soft filters, but we no longer know how to be vulnerable in front of another person, without an audience. The illusion of constant connection. Being constantly connected isn't the same as being accompanied. Being online doesn't mean being present. Often, we use the internet as a shield. It fills the emptiness for a moment, but makes it bigger afterward. Have you noticed how easy it is to feel lonely, even surrounded by messages? How a comment can sound like noise instead of conversation? How a compliment can feel more like pressure to maintain an image than genuine contact? That's because technical connection doesn't replace existential connection. Heidegger wrote about the need to live authentically. Authenticity, for him, doesn't mean being different. It means facing your own finitude, your own anxiety, your own being. But that's impossible when you live only outwardly. Solitude as a space for truth. There's a kind of loneliness that hurts. The loneliness of abandonment, of disconnection. But there's another kind, fertile, creative, revealing. The kind that allows you to meet yourself. And that one is disappearing. We stay too busy to sit in silence, too connected to hear our own breathing, too exposed to notice what we really feel. But as Heidegger reminds us, it's only in confronting anxiety that being reveals itself. Only in emptiness does authenticity emerge. Only when we allow ourselves to be truly alone can we ask, "Who am I?" without the gaze of others. That simple, terrifying question is the doorway to what's real. Technology isn't the enemy, but how we use it might be. Let's be clear. Social media isn't evil in itself. It connects, informs, inspires. It can create real bonds when used wisely. The problem is when it becomes a substitute for presence, listening, and inner life. When it starts defining who we are. When solitude becomes something to fear instead of a space for self-discovery. Heidegger invites us to live more authentically. And today, that might mean something radical. To disconnect for a while. To reconnect with what's essential. Maybe that means putting your phone away for an hour, having a slow, unhurried face-to-face conversation, not posting anything for a day, and noticing what's left of you when there's no instant feedback. To truly see and be seen. What ends existential loneliness isn't a like. It's a bond. It's affection built through presence. Time invested in mutual listening. Touch, silence, care. We don't need more digital connections. We need more human encounters. And that starts with the courage to look at another person and at yourself without filters, without a script, without performance. Only then does the self stop being a character and become a real presence in the world again. You wake up and drink a glass of water. An app notifies you. Hydration goal. Completed. You go for a walk and get another notification. Congrats, you reached your step goal. You finish a task at work, check it off your list, level up in a productivity app, and receive an automatic message with digital confetti. Every small act of life has become a goal with a score. We now live in a world where everything needs to be tracked, rated, and rewarded. This is called the gamification of life, the application of game mechanics to everyday routines. At first glance, it seems harmless, even helpful. After all, who doesn't like to be acknowledged? But there's a deeper, nearly invisible problem behind all of this. When everything becomes a task, living stops being an experience and becomes a performance. Life as a daily mission and the loss of intrinsic value. In the gamified mindset, every action has to lead somewhere. Drinking water isn't just about staying hydrated. It's completing a goal. Reading a book isn't about getting lost in a story. It's progress on your reading challenge. Meditating isn't simply breathing in silence. It's maintaining your streak in an app. The consequence is subtle but devastating. Life stops having intrinsic value and starts having value only when it's converted into measurable results. It's as if everything we do must be justified by a visible benefit, a measurable outcome, an upward graph. But does everything really need to be measured? Have silence, idleness, mistakes, and unproductive time completely lost their worth? Viktor Frankl. Meaning can't be measured. Austrian psychiatrist. Viktor Frankl, author of Man's Search for Meaning, said that humans can't live only on pleasure or efficiency. We need something greater, meaning. But for Frankl, Meaning isn't something you can measure. It can't be reduced to results or fit into spreadsheets. It's lived through our relationship with the world, with others, and with ourselves, through the depth of experience, not its quantification. He wrote, "The meaning of life differs from man to man, from day to day, from hour to hour. What matters is not the meaning of life in general, but the specific meaning of a person's life at a given moment." That quote reminds us that life isn't a game with levels, stages, or achievements. It's fluid, uncertain, subjective, and that's exactly what makes it beautiful. The side effects of gamification: anxiety and dehumanization. Gamification promises to make life more fun, engaging, and efficient, but in practice, it's fueling anxiety, comparison, and constant self-evaluation. Have you ever felt bad for not doing anything useful in a day? Felt frustrated for breaking your streak in an app? Started doing something you enjoyed, only for it to turn into another obligation? That's the sign the game is consuming you. When we turn life into a point system, we turn ourselves into products. We constantly rate, compare, and validate ourselves through badges, progress bars, and personal performance reports. The result? A growing distance from real, deep, imperfect experiences, the simple act of being alive. When even leisure becomes a task, it's no longer enough just to rest. You have to rest the right way. Work out with an app, cook with a timer, sleep with a sleep tracker, read with a page goal. Even moments of pleasure are now ruled by the logic of efficiency. What was supposed to be spontaneous has become strategy. What was supposed to be light has become another action plan. And the cruelest part? This mindset is sold as self-improvement. But are we really evolving, or just moving into a new kind of prison? We've left behind the capitalist grind of endless work, only to import it into our personal lives. Now, we're our own bosses. We pressure ourselves, measure ourselves, reward ourselves. We've gamified the soul. The line between motivation and manipulation. Gamification, to be fair, isn't all bad. It can help people who struggle with focus, discipline, or routine. It can encourage healthier habits, study, or organization. The problem begins when it stops being a tool and becomes the goal itself. When we can't act without external stimulation, without a score, without a visible reward. That's when we stop being agents of action and become targets of behavioral manipulation. And there's a name for that: conditioning. By constantly rewarding certain behaviors, we internalize the belief that something is only worth doing if there's an immediate return. But as Frankl taught, meaning doesn't always bring visible rewards. Sometimes, the most valuable things are precisely those that can't be measured. The risk of losing life's spontaneity. Imagine a child drawing. She's immersed, unhurried, aimless. She draws because she wants to, because she feels it, because it connects her to something inside herself. Now imagine she starts drawing only to earn gold stars, points, followers. The act stops being expression and becomes performance. That's happening to all of us. How many things have you stopped doing because they didn't produce results? How many experiences have you skipped because they had no goal? When everything must have a measurable purpose, we lose the beauty of doing something just because. And without that sense of freedom, life loses its poetry. Reconnecting with the value of the useless. The solution isn't abandoning all digital tools or demonizing personal organization systems. It's about recovering the meaning behind what we do, before the system swallows the person. Walk without counting steps. Read without goals. Cook without posting. Look at the sky without taking a picture. Live without turning everything into data. What seems useless to the productive mindset might be what's most essential for the soul. Frankl said meaning appears when we dedicate ourselves to something greater than ourselves. A cause, a love, a value. And those moments rarely show up on a chart. They happen in the spaces between our goals. Living is not winning, it's experiencing. In the end, Life isn't a game with rankings. You don't need to break records to justify your existence. You're not competing with anyone. You're here to live, deeply, imperfectly, humanly, and that begins the moment you stop chasing points and start truly inhabiting your moments. I deleted my social media. I erased everything. Disappearing was a relief. Phrases like these have become increasingly common, not as acts of rebellion, but as quiet gestures of exhaustion. People are deleting profiles, leaving social platforms, vanishing from group chats, disappearing digitally, often without any explanation. It's not just a break, it's a symbolic renunciation. As if the very act of being virtually present had become unbearable, and this escape, which might seem technical at first, is deeply existential. We live in an age where to exist means to be visible, posting, replying, participating, engaging. So to disappear is more than absence. It's a cry, a silent cry that says, I can't take this anymore. Camus and the only real philosophical question French philosopher Albert Camus, in The Myth of Sisyphus, said that suicide is the only truly serious philosophical question because it forces us to face the most uncomfortable of all questions. Is life worth living? For Camus, confronting the absurdity of existence, the fact that we seek meaning in an indifferent universe, leaves us with three options: physical suicide, faith in something transcendent, like God, rebellion, continuing to live without absolute meaning, with courage and lucidity. But today, there's a fourth, more subtle response to the absurd: digital disappearance. It's not the end of the body, but the erasure of the social self. As if someone was saying, I'm still alive. I just don't want to be part of this anymore. I want to disappear, at least from this fabricated world. In that sense, it's a modern form of partial existential suicide. Disappearing online as a response to the absurd Camus showed that when we can't find enough meaning to go on, the urge to give up appears. In the digital age, that surrender doesn't have to be physical. It happens quietly, through clicks, deactivating an account, deleting every photo, leaving group chats, stopping replies. And often, it's not planned. It happens in a moment of deep emotional exhaustion, an invisible collapse, but a real one. A no more against a system that demands constant presence, perfect images, and endless emotional availability. The person can no longer stand being a character, can't handle the pressure to perform, so they vanish. And that says a lot about our collective emotional state. There's a growing need to silence the noise, to escape the spotlight, to recover some inner peace, even if that peace means absence. Zygmunt Bauman and the fear of fragile exposure sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, in his studies on liquid modernity, described a world of fragile bonds, disposable relationships, and constant pressure to appear interesting. In this world, public life becomes a stage, and the self becomes a product. But there's a cost, the constant feeling of vulnerability. Bauman said that we've never been so exposed, and yet so insecure. Posting has become risky. Exposure has become mandatory. Personal life has turned into public performance. And under this overload of visibility, the urge to disappear grows, not because we hate others, but because we've lost ourselves. Disappearing as a cry for help. In most cases, people who vanish online don't want to die. They just want to stop performing. They want to breathe again without having to prove anything. They want to remember who they are, without likes, comments, or algorithms defining it. But this disappearance isn't always understood. Some call it drama, others call it overreaction. Few recognize what's really behind it: a request for pause, a plea to be heard, a need to exist without conditions. It's the echo of a humanity suffocated by constant validation, a reflection of what Camus called a silent rebellion against the absurd, the illusion of belonging and the reality of emptiness. Social media gives us the illusion of belonging. We're part of groups, feeds, communities, bubbles. Yet loneliness keeps growing. It's as if we're surrounded by voices, but no one's really listening, connected to everyone, yet disconnected from ourselves. In that sense, disappearing digitally can be an act of reclaiming, a way of returning inward, of leaving the battlefield of appearances, to rediscover the truth of presence. Camus taught that a life without objective meaning can still be lived, as long as it's lived with awareness, freedom, and choice. And maybe disappearing today is exactly that, a cry for choice, for space, for a moment where being can breathe, without explanation. The life that remains. After the algorithm, people who have disappeared from the digital world often say the same things. I started hearing my own thoughts again. I began paying attention to what actually matters to me. I felt a strange silence, but a good one. Outside the constant flow of updates, there's emptiness, but not the emptiness of despair, the fertile emptiness of a new beginning, a space to rebuild meaning, slowly, without comparison, without measurement. Viktor Frankl, another thinker of existential emptiness, once said, "Life never ceases to have meaning, even when it seems it does. The task is to discover that meaning, not to receive it ready-made. Disappearing might be the first step toward that rediscovery, a way of saying, I exist, and I want to exist outside this logic of exposure. Neither drama nor weakness, just humanity. We need to stop treating digital disappearance as something strange. It's a deeply human reaction to a system that demands constant presence, relevance, and coherence. Not every disappearance is a crisis. Sometimes it's healing. It's the soul's way of saying, I'm still here, but I need to find myself again. 30 days without sugar. 21-day gratitude challenge. Read 12 books per month. Project. Wake up at 5 a.m. for 60 straight days. On the surface, it all sounds positive. Healthy habits, lifestyle changes, commitments to self-improvement. But beneath this rhythm of short-term goals and personal challenges, there's something worth looking at more deeply. What happens when we turn our lives into an endless sequence of small temporary projects? Are we filling the void, or just pushing it further ahead? Are we creating meaning, or just avoiding the bigger question by staying busy? The cult of micro-purposes. In recent years, setting short-term goals has become a trend, and it's no coincidence. They bring an immediate sense of progress, direction, and control. In the chaos of modern life, having a personal mission for 7, 21, or 30 days can feel like an anchor. It's like we're telling ourselves, at least now I know what I have to do. But the real question is, what comes after that? After each finished cycle, the need for another one appears, another challenge, another goal. And little by little, life turns into a race of deadlines, even outside of work. Meaning has become a sprint. What used to be a lifelong search, a reason to live, a lasting purpose, a deeper value, has now been broken into short experiments. The meaning of existence dissolves into 30 days to reset your mindset, self-love challenge, annual SMART goals. There's nothing wrong with these practices themselves. They can be useful, even transformative. The problem begins when they replace silence, introspection, and genuine reflection, when they serve as a substitute for the essential question, what truly gives my life meaning? It's easier to follow a spreadsheet than to face the void. Easier to define goals than to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing. Easier to stay busy with new habits than to ask why everything still feels so repetitive, even with so many goals. Frankl, meaning is discovered, not invented. Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, survivor of Nazi concentration camps and creator of logotherapy, taught that life's meaning isn't something we randomly invent, it's something we discover. And more than that, it's not always internal, solitary, or convenient. Meaning appears in our relationship with the world, with others, and with the real circumstances that shape us. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how, endeth Viktor Frankl. But the culture of personal projects often tells us to look only inward. It reduces meaning to a matter of self-management. Just organize your routine better, discipline your mind, follow the right plan, and your purpose will appear. But life doesn't work like a quarterly productivity plan. It's not linear. It demands responses to real, unpredictable situations that challenge our inner structures. And above all, it requires connection with others. Frankl emphasized that meaning often reveals itself when we stop looking only at ourselves and start responding to something greater, a love, a responsibility, someone else's pain, a call to serve. When self-improvement becomes a trap, personal development projects, when repeated non-stop, can become a form of existential escape. We're always trying to improve, grow, optimize, but we rarely stop to ask, improve for what? Grow toward what? And more importantly, who convinced us we're never good enough? There's an entire industry built on our chronic insecurity. It constantly sells us another challenge, another plan, another transformation. And without realizing it, we get stuck in a cycle of endless self-optimization with no real direction. The question shifts. Do these personal challenges help us live better, or just help us cope with not knowing what we're doing with our lives? Being lost is also part of the path. Life isn't made only of certainties. At many moments, the void appears, and it's not a sign of failure. It's a sign of openness, of space, of an invitation to something new. But today, the void is treated like an error in the system, and it's instantly filled with productivity, projects, and goals. Frankl reminds us that existential emptiness can't be fixed with activity, only with meaning. And meaning often needs time to emerge. Maybe instead of filling every month with a new challenge, we should learn to accept the silence between cycles, to stay without a plan, to breathe in the in-between, to notice what truly moves us, not just what distracts us from anxiety. Projects that connect, not isolate. The culture of personal projects is often lonely. My challenge, my routine, my discipline. But deeper meaning doesn't come from isolation. It comes from connection. Frankl said that human beings are, by nature, beings in relation. And true purpose often appears when we open ourselves to love, pain, or the call of others. That doesn't mean abandoning individual growth. It means remembering that we don't have all the answers alone. From a 30-day project to a life project, the final question is inevitable. Are short-term challenges helping you live with more awareness, or just keeping you too busy to ask deeper questions? Goals can be helpful, of course, but if they just follow one after another with no real pause for reflection, they become a cycle of motion without transformation. A life project, on the other hand, doesn't have to be epic, public, or perfect, but it does require honesty, commitment, alignment with who you are and with the world that shapes you. And above all, it requires time. Time to feel, to fail, to begin again. Time to discover, not just to execute. Do you feel it? A kind of anguish that doesn't belong just to you, but seems to hang in the air, in the oceans, in the burning forests. A constant unease in the face of catastrophic headlines, red climbing graphs, and predictions that describe a future that may never come. At least not the way we imagined it. It's the feeling that the planet is collapsing before our eyes, and that there's nothing we can really do. That anxiety has a name: eco-anxiety, a term used to describe the emotional pain tied to the environmental crisis. But it's more than a psychological phenomenon. It's existential, philosophical, deeply human. We're facing a new kind of void, the planetary void. A gap not just between present and future, but between what we know needs to be done and what we're actually able to do. Nietzsche and the collapse of values. German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, when he declared God is dead, wasn't celebrating a victory. He was warning about a vacuum of meaning that would emerge in the Western world after the fall of traditional values, religious, moral, metaphysical. Without those foundations, life risks becoming an empty landscape, without direction, purpose, or center. That condition is what Nietzsche called nihilism, the sense that nothing truly matters anymore. Today, we live through a new form of nihilism, climate nihilism. Not because we stopped believing in God, but because we've lost faith in the possibility of the future. And what's even more tragic, even though we know what must be done, society seems paralyzed. It's as if we're standing inside a burning building, taking selfies instead of finding the exit. Ecological collapse as existential collapse. The climate crisis isn't just environmental, it's spiritual, political, ethical, and deeply personal. It forces us to face questions that go beyond science. How do we keep living fully, knowing the planet might not sustain the next generations? How do we build a life project when the entire system might collapse? How do we not give in to despair when the most urgent decisions keep getting ignored or delayed? This kind of anxiety isn't like ordinary anxiety. It doesn't come from fear of something immediate, but from a cloudy, almost mythical future. It's suffering for the world, a planetary pain. And in this reality, many people start to feel a strange kind of emptiness. If everything's going to end, why bother? If no one changes, why should I try? If the system's doomed, why keep fighting? It's nihilism disguised as ecological awareness. But, as Nietzsche would warn, that's the most dangerous moment. Because when everything seems meaningless, that's when we're most tempted to give up. On ourselves, on others, on the planet. Global inertia and inner exhaustion. We live in the age of environmental conferences, carbon pledges, and net zero by 2050 promises. Yet emissions rise, deforestation expands, the oceans keep warming. This contradiction between discourse and action breeds a growing sense of powerlessness. It's as if the world keeps saying, yes, we know, but we just can't stop. Sociologist Zygmunt Bauman once said that, in our liquid modernity, we live in an age of action without responsibility. We act constantly, but without thinking about the deeper consequences of our actions. In the ecological sphere, this becomes a cruel paradox. We know more than ever about environmental damage, and yet, we still can't change fast enough. That powerlessness isn't only external. It hits the individual at the core. Ordinary people feel caught between guilt and despair. Recycling feels useless. Reducing consumption feels irrelevant in the face of systemic collapse. And the result is emotional withdrawal, apathy disguised as awareness. From collapse to care, is there a way out? Nietzsche believed nihilism didn't have to be the end. He saw in the fall of old values an opportunity, a call to create new meanings. Crisis, for him, was also an invitation to responsibility and creativity. So we might ask, can the environmental collapse push us to radically rethink our way of life, our relationships, our values? Maybe the planetary void we feel is actually grief. Grief for a world that no longer exists. A world where progress was endless, nature was a resource, and the future was guaranteed. That world is gone. And now we're faced with the task of inventing a new one, or facing the consequences. This reinvention won't come from heroes or miracles. It will begin with small, conscious, grounded changes, not out of guilt, but out of care, not out of naive optimism, but out of clarity. Frankl and meaning amid catastrophe. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, taught that humans can find meaning even in the darkest circumstances. Not a meaning imposed from outside, but a personal response to the question that life itself asks. And today, life asks us, what will you do with the time you still have? How will you respond to the pain of the world without letting it consume you? Frankl didn't preach resignation or illusion. He believed in a form of inner resistance, acting with dignity, even when everything seems lost, serving life, even when it's in ruins. Maybe the answer to the planetary void isn't to save the world alone, but to recognize that every act, every choice, every connection still carries meaning, hope, as construction, not as comfort. The kind of hope that can save us isn't naive or blindly optimistic. It's tragic, lucid, and active. It sees the abyss and keeps walking anyway. It refuses to close its eyes to pain, but also refuses to close its heart to the possibility of change. Nietzsche spoke of the Übermensch, the one who, faced with collapse, doesn't run away but creates. Maybe that's our task today, to create, even among the ashes, to plant meaning in a dying soil, because in the end, the world will only keep existing if we still believe it's worth it. Just scroll through social media for a few seconds and you'll see it, that image of someone meditating by the ocean with a soft, cursive quote, "Connect with your essence." Vibrate at the frequency of the universe. Breathe, surrender, trust. Yoga videos, photos of ayahuasca retreats, people smiling with incense, crystals, mantras. Everything looks beautiful, peaceful, marketable. In recent years, spirituality has become a booming business and one of the most profitable. But behind this growth lies a strange paradox. The more we talk about spirit, the less depth we seem to find. The more we consume meaning, the less we actually feel it. What was once a path inward has, in many cases, turned into an aesthetic of emotional wellness, adapted to the rhythm of productivity, the Instagram feed, and the logic of self-branding. Spirituality has become a shelf product, meaning as an accessory. Ancient practices like Buddhist mindfulness, transcendental meditation, devotional yoga, and indigenous plant rituals have been absorbed into the fast-paced Western consumer world. And in that process, they've silently changed form, from tools of transcendence to tools of comfort, from paths of transformation to emotional productivity hacks. Now people meditate to be more focused, breathe to be more efficient, take ayahuasca to unlock creativity, practice yoga for a better body and less anxiety. The problem isn't the practices themselves, they're still powerful. It's how they're being used as quick fixes for internal discomfort, without the commitment to real transformation. Kierkegaard. Faith. Without anguish isn't faith. Danish philosopher. Søren Kierkegaard devoted his life to exploring the dilemmas of existence, faith, and inwardness. For him, true spirituality demanded something rare and difficult: anguish, depth, the courage to face despair. Faith begins where thinking ends. Kierkegaard. For him, spirituality wasn't an accessory. It was a radical encounter with the abyss of the self, with freedom, with the responsibility of existing without guarantees. Faith, in his view, was a relationship with the absolute, a commitment to the unseen that demands our whole being, not something that simply serves us when convenient. But in today's spirituality, everything has to be light, quick, and comfortable. Anguish is avoided at all costs. The sacred is no longer allowed to disturb, only to soothe. And that's how we lose the heart of true spiritual experience, the confrontation with mystery, silence, and not knowing. The self that consumes spirituality like coffee. In today's culture, self-knowledge has become just another item in the shopping cart. We choose whatever practice fits our schedule. We look for retreats that photograph well. We trade prayer for positive affirmation. We mix and match ideas from different traditions, often without understanding or respecting their origins. It's as if spirituality became a self-serve buffet. You take a little of everything, arrange it nicely, and post a picture before you even taste it. But spirituality isn't flavor, it's fire. It's not makeup for the ego. It's the unveiling of the soul, and that fire can't be tamed by an algorithm. The promise of relief without transformation. Much of today's spiritual marketing promises relief, relief from anxiety, relief from emotional pain, relief from inner restlessness, but rarely does it offer a path of passage. Kierkegaard would say that anguish is the doorway to freedom. Only those who face despair, who don't know who they are, who feel out of place, who lose themselves can take the leap into authentic faith. But that leap doesn't fit into a weekend workshop. It's not solved by a motivational quote or by a mantra repeated on autopilot. The spirituality that truly transforms isn't comfortable. It tears before it heals. It forces you to face parts of yourself you'd rather ignore. And that's why it's so much easier to consume spirituality than to live it. The problem isn't the search, it's the shallowness of it. Let's be clear, the spiritual search itself is real, necessary, urgent. We live in a fragmented, cynical, and hyper-accelerated world. Of course, people crave refuge, depth, and transcendence. The problem is reducing that search to a lifestyle accessory, turning it into a trend, an aesthetic, a productivity tool. Spirituality isn't emotional performance. It's presence, listening, contact with something beyond control. And above all, spirituality isn't about having answers. It's about staying open to the question. Kierkegaard spoke of being oneself before God, not an image, not a persona, but the naked truth of existence surrendered to mystery. That doesn't fit in slogans. It doesn't translate well into posts. But maybe that's exactly what we're missing. When the aesthetic becomes more important than the ethical. We worry about the right incense, the color of the yoga mat, the perfect breathing rhythm, but we forget to ask, how does this practice change me? Does it make me more aware, more responsible in the world, more compassionate toward others? Because there is no authentic spirituality without ethical transformation, without responsibility, without renunciation. Consuming spirituality without living its implications is like reciting a poem you don't understand. It might sound beautiful, but it never reaches the soul, reconnecting with the sacred, not the showcase. Maybe the way back is to stop searching for the sacred in the feed and start seeking it in silence, in unproductive time, in slow listening, in the contemplation of what is simple, real, and imperfect. Return to spirituality as a journey, not as a quick fix. Withdraw. Feel the discomfort of anguish. Accept not knowing. And still, keep going. Because as Kierkegaard said, faith isn't certainty, it's risk. And only those who accept the risk can experience the real miracle of transcendence. Amid endless profiles, swipes, likes, and matches, a silent question arises. How can we love deeply in a culture that pushes us to discard quickly? Zygmunt Bauman coined the term liquid love to describe this kind of modern relationship. Fragile, fleeting, conditional. Meanwhile, Viktor Frankl, founder of logotherapy, once said, "Love is the only way to grasp another human being in the innermost core of his personality." And between these two views lies the core of our modern problem. Love has stopped being a commitment and has become an option. Connection has replaced bond, and the meaning of the other has faded away. The fragility of bonds in liquid modernity. Bauman warned that in liquid modernity, marked by speed, fluidity, and uncertainty, our human bonds have lost the solidity that once sustained love and relationships. Institutions, traditions, long-term commitments, all have shifted. He noted that modern relationships tend to be more about connections than true relationships. Online relations seek connections, since connections don't require involvement or depth. In other words, the logic of consumption, fast, disposable, desire-driven, has entered the realm of affection. The other person is no longer someone to care for, grow with, and accompany through life, but someone to use, test, and replace. And what does this lead to? An existential emptiness in relationships, because love doesn't survive the use and throw away mindset. It demands permanence, vulnerability, and commitment. Bauman wrote that the greatest challenge today is to love while craving freedom, but without taking responsibility for what love truly demands. Frankl's view, love as the path to meaning. Frankl, who endured unimaginable suffering during the Holocaust, discovered that even when everything falls apart, love remains a bridge to human meaning. Love is the only way to grasp another human being in the innermost core of his personality. His lesson is simple but profound. Love isn't a light feeling. It's a commitment to the being of another person, to their potential, to their deepest reality. For him, love was not just an escape from loneliness, but a way out of existential emptiness. The one who loves truly helps the other become who they're meant to be, and in doing so, discovers meaning for themselves as well. True love, then, demands effort, presence, and time. It cannot be replaced by brief encounters, by what's fleeting or superficial. The modern dilemma: loving in an age of disposability. In the world of dating apps, endless profiles, and disappearing messages, there's less and less space for love as commitment. What we see instead are experiments, tests, replacements. This fits perfectly with Bauman's critique. Love has become a consumer product. People have become items for instant evaluation. Depth has been forgotten, and so emptiness grows when love means having someone, not being with someone, when the person next to you can be replaced with a single click. When avoiding the pain of being abandoned becomes more important than facing the pain of abandoning. This emptiness isn't just emotional, it's existential. Because to love isn't simply to be together. It's to be present, to be responsible, to give yourself. And when that self-giving becomes optional, relationships turn into mirrors of consumption, not shared life. Frankl would remind us that meaning appears when we turn toward others, when we respond to life's questions, not when we chase isolated pleasures. But loving in liquid times requires courage, the courage to stay, to fail, to commit, to become vulnerable. How to love deeply today. So how do we reclaim depth in love and escape this relational emptiness? 1. Redefine love as commitment, not consumption. To love isn't to choose someone based on looks, status, or instant compatibility. It's to choose someone to be with through good days and bad. That kind of commitment, Bauman says, is becoming rare, but it's essential. 2. See the other as a subject, not an object. Frankl invites us to see the other person's essence, not as a reflection of our needs, but in their potential. To love deeply means helping the other become more of who they truly are, not who we want them to be. 3. Accept that bonding takes time and presence. In a culture that worships speed, efficiency, and instant gratification, love requires slowing down, being present, listening, failing, rebuilding, because bonds are built not only in good moments, but through constancy, through staying. 4. Embrace the risk of vulnerability. To love is to open yourself to pain, frustration, and loss. In Bauman's liquid world, avoiding risk has become the rule, but real love only appears when we dare to suffer with and for someone. 5. Create meaning. Together. Love isn't just comfort, it's a task. Frankl believed meaning is discovered in responding to life, and shared life offers that chance. To face challenges, grow together, and build shared purpose. What happens if we don't? If we keep following the liquid logic of love, treating disposability as normal, we face serious risks, growing loneliness, even inside relationships. The feeling that no one sees me or no one takes me seriously. Relationships that feel shallow, empty, and temporary. Loss of trust in ourselves and in others. The inability to find meaning in love itself, which then only matters while it satisfies us, not while it challenges us. And ironically, we lose love, not because it no longer exists, but because we stopped inhabiting it. We stopped letting it grow, stay, and transform. To love deeply in an age of disposable links and fleeting profiles is both a philosophical and practical challenge. It means resisting the logic of consumption applied to emotions, reclaiming presence, responsibility, and lasting connection. Bauman warns us about the danger of liquid love, fragile bonds in an era of constant flow. Frankl, on the other hand, reminds us that love is the privileged path to meaning, not light, not shallow, but dense, demanding, transformative. If we truly want to love, not just be in a relationship, we must rediscover the value of permanence, vulnerability, and shared creation. In the end, love might just be the most creative and radical response to the emptiness of liquid relationship. In the mirror, or rather, on the feed, someone smiles at a camera. The body is well lit, the filter is on, and the comments below praise the result. But inside, there's silence. Who is this body? And does this body still hold a living self? In the age of selfies, perfect stories, and marketable bodies, the body itself has become an existential project, turned into a product, a costume, a showcase, all designed to work in the visible world. But in this effort to look good, to be admired, to hide every flaw, we face the risk that philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre foresaw long ago, the risk of becoming an object for the gaze of others. The body as spectacle and the alienation of the self. Sartre explained that when we're seen by another person, we begin to exist for them as an object. In his book Being and Nothingness, he developed the idea of the look. When someone looks at us, we stop being purely free subjects and become beings for that gaze, objects of perception. That experience has intensified with social media. The body no longer lives for itself, it lives to be seen. It's shaped, edited, compared. Muscles, skin, smile, angles, all arranged to please the eye of the other. And when that happens repeatedly, what was alive becomes hollow. The inner value of existence gets replaced by external validation, by likes as the new measure of worth, contemporary narcissism, and the aesthetics of the image. It's no exaggeration to say that this obsession with appearance creates a narcissistic void. A person tries to look perfect, and in doing so, loses touch with their own imperfection, the very thing that makes them human. Modern studies on body image and narcissism confirm it. The more someone's sense of self depends on physical appearance, the more vulnerable they are to anxiety and inner emptiness. The body stops being a means of living. It becomes an end in itself. It turns into a spectacle. And here lies the final paradox. In the desire to be seen, the person forgets to live. And in living only to be seen, they forget to feel. The aesthetic pressure as a life project. Today, phrases like be healthy, get in shape, build your dream body are as common as be happy. But these phrases turn the body into a checklist. Train, eat right, hydrate, pose. The body becomes an existential project, when in truth, it should simply be the home of existence. Returning to Sartre. When the body becomes an object for others, human freedom is reduced. We no longer move because we want to. We move so that others will see. And once that happens, we let the gaze of others define us. Autonomy becomes dependent on approval. A mask that consumes the real. On the feed, perfect bodies fill the stage. What's missing are the in-between moments, the pain, the sleepless nights, the trembling body, the value that can't be measured in abs or filters. What's missing is the real. What's left is the mask, and masks require constant energy to maintain, constant renewal, because the gaze is never satisfied, and so the emptiness grows inside. Because self-love, self-care, and real living can't depend on likes. A self-esteem that comes from outside is unstable. When the likes drop, so does the confirmation, and with it, the fragile self-worth built on external approval. The body machine and the alienated self. Sartre spoke of the body machine, the body seen only through a utilitarian lens, or as an object in someone else's view. As modern philosophy explains, in the second ontological dimension of the body, the individual becomes an object through the gaze of another. Today, that objectification is magnified by technology, by constant cameras, by the endless loop of social media. The body lives for the lens, for the audience, for the algorithm. It becomes an object of self-branding, of marketing, of narrative. Meanwhile, the human subject, the one who feels, suffers, and exists, disappears from view. Authenticity versus the mask. Being authentic, being present and vulnerable, has become a risk, because the standard now demands perfection, control, and shine. The person who cries, fails, ages, or asks, "Who am I beyond my image?" seems to have no place on the digital stage, and so they internalize, "If I'm not admired, I'm worthless." And that's when emptiness sets in. Sartre said that bad faith is the condition of those who pretend to be what they are not, to escape the anxiety of freedom or to please others. In today's aesthetic culture, that translates to bodies being reshaped, filtered, and molded without any real inner direction. The existential consequences of the narcissistic void. When the meaning of one's existence is replaced by an image, the self begins to feel hollow. Even with visual applause, something remains unchanged inside, because the true value of life isn't in being seen, but in being. This narcissistic void often shows up as anxiety, depression, eating disorders, constant comparison, and chronic dissatisfaction. Research links body self-consciousness with vulnerable narcissism. People who live through their image suffer the most from how they believe others perceive them. Reversing the mirror, from body image to body being. How do we reclaim a body that's a means and not an end? How do we live fully within it again? First step, turn off the mirror, even briefly. Reduce dependence on the image as a measure of worth. Second, return to the body's function, to walk, breathe, touch, live. See the body not as a showcase, but as a vessel for existence. Third, rediscover inner value. Ask yourself, what does this body allow me to do? Who can I be with it? What kind of relationship do I build with the world through it? Not, how do they see me, but how do I feel? Fourth, accept imperfection. The body changes, ages, gets sick. To exist isn't to preserve an untouchable image, but to embrace finitude. Authenticity in the age of masks. To reclaim the body as the home of existence takes courage, the courage to be bare before yourself, to fail, to stop performing. It means seeing the body not as a product, but as presence. It means letting the human being become a subject again, not an object. Sartre reminds us that true freedom is to exist for oneself, not for the other. When the body lives for others, freedom is lost. Life becomes a performance, and existence loses its depth. A call to presence: pause and ask yourself, is your body being used by you or by someone else's gaze? How many moments are lived just to be recorded? And how many are lived to be felt? What is the value of your existence if it can't be measured in likes? The narcissistic void feeds on image, but life feeds on being. To reclaim the body, then, is to reclaim our humanity. To exist, to feel, to relate, to make mistakes, to grow, not as a display case of ourselves, but as a space of presence. Open any self-help book or scroll through your social media for a few minutes, and you'll be hit with phrases like, "You deserve to be happy," "Transform your life in 30 days," "Wake up to your potential." Positive motivation itself isn't the issue. The problem is how today's self-help culture works, as a defense mechanism against existential emptiness, not as an invitation to live more deeply. The promise is simple, almost seductive. If you just follow the right steps, adopt the right method, wake up early, meditate, visualize, manifest, you'll find meaning, become your best self, and overcome what bothers you. The problem? This promise usually skips what comes before transformation: the abyss, the suffering, the anxiety, the nothingness, what Albert Camus called the absurd. Camus said the absurd is born from the clash between our human need for meaning and the silent indifference of the universe. For him, the starting point isn't escape, it's recognition. And once you've recognized the absurd, you live in revolt, not a loud rebellion, but a quiet affirmation of life, even with no guarantees. And that's where the paradox of modern self-help lies. It offers quick fixes, positive feelings, easy strategies, some of them genuinely helpful, but it avoids a real confrontation with emptiness, doubt, failure, and mortality. It's like saying, don't worry about the abyss, just jump up using method X and you'll be fine. But Camus would argue that the jump only matters if you've looked into the abyss first. Avoiding the void doesn't solve it. It only delays it. Positivity as anesthesia. Inside self-help culture, positivity has become a moral rule. Feeling sad, anxious, tired, or questioning the meaning of life now feels like personal failure, not a normal part of being human. The message is clear. If you feel this way, you just haven't applied the right method yet. That mindset creates a cycle of guilt, collapse, and temporary recovery, because the solution is always one step ahead, never fully reached. Constant positivity turns into existential anesthesia. We keep running, smiling, improving, but stop feeling, stop living, stop facing the void. Camus warned that facing the absurd is painful, but escaping it with distractions or false comfort means surrender. What he offered wasn't resignation, but conscious rebellion, living with clarity despite the absurd. When self-help promises happiness in 21 days, a weekend transformation, or purpose in 10 steps, it's often negotiating with the void, trading depth for speed, attention for routine, being for doing. The avoided, but still present, void. The void doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. It accumulates like a silent shadow, the lingering feeling that something's still missing. You can avoid confronting doubt for a while, but it always returns, often bringing anxiety, frustration, and the sense that you're never enough. And what's behind that? A life that was meant to be a journey becomes a series of checklists. Meaning, which should arise from encounters with others and with the world, gets reduced to a self-improvement product. Camus called this philosophical suicide, refusing to face the absurd, replacing deep questioning with comfortable techniques. When we avoid the void, we build an inner form of entertainment, a life that looks light but lacks roots. We give value to everything except what actually sustains being. The result is a hollow self, full of routines but empty of meaning. The ethics of revolt, not distraction. Camus didn't preach hopelessness. He preached revolt. For him, accepting the absurd isn't giving up. It's waking up. To live means recognizing that the universe offers no easy answers, and still choosing to act, to love, to create, with awareness and passion. Applied to self-help, this becomes a different kind of question. Instead of asking, how can I feel better? Ask, how can I live more deeply, even without certainty? Instead of, which method makes me happy? Ask, what calls me, even if it hurts? Instead of, how do I fix my emotions? Maybe ask, how can I embrace my human condition and act with integrity? Camus' idea of revolt isn't just personal, it's ethical. It means recognizing that living also involves others, the community, the world, not just the me that needs to improve. The absurd demands responsibility, not avoidance. When self-help becomes escape. Of course, many self-help practices are valuable: meditation, therapy, healthy habits, reflection. The problem begins when these practices turn into emotional currency, products, or escapes, instead of tools for authentic inner growth. The always positive mindset avoids the hard truths of being human: aging, illness, loss, mistakes, love, death. These subjects are rarely discussed because they have no quick fix, but it's exactly in those territories that meaning appears, not in comfortable lightness. The avoided void doesn't vanish. It turns into frustration, silent emptiness, and that haunting feeling that something's still missing, walking through the void with courage. So how do we engage with self-help culture without falling into the trap of escape? Allow yourself to feel what you feel: sadness, doubt, fatigue. without trying to fix it immediately. Recognize there's no universal method for meaning, only your personal path. Choose practices that challenge you, not just comfort you. Don't turn self-help into performance. Let it be private and honest. Ask yourself, what truly matters to me, even if it brings no instant result? Act in relation to the world. Meaning often comes from connection, not self-focus. This isn't a rejection of self-help. It's an invitation to use it consciously and deeply. As a tool, not a magic solution, the self-help culture has its value, but when it turns into toxic positivity, it hides the very thing we need most to face: the void, the doubt, the reality that nothing is guaranteed. Camus invites us to live with the absurd, not run from it. Only then can we build an ethics of depth, a way of existing that doesn't settle for the surface. If you're tired of constantly improving, maybe it's time to pause, not to give up, but to listen to what your inner silence is trying to say. Because meaning doesn't come from finished checklists, but from hearts brave enough to keep beating, even in the void. In a world that demands constant action, quick results, and endless noise, there's something almost rebellious about allowing yourself to be empty. Not emptiness as failure or defeat, but emptiness as space, as fertile ground for what hasn't yet taken shape, as silence, as resistance to the cult of always more. The right to emptiness means claiming the freedom to exist without filling every second with productivity, to rest without guilt, to be before doing, confronting nothingness, because being depends on it. In his lecture, What is Metaphysics?, Martin Heidegger explored one of philosophy's most puzzling statements: Das Nichts nichtet. Roughly, nothing nothings. For him, nothing isn't just the absence of something. It's not an object or a void to be feared. It's a revelation of our human condition, the moment when all things seem to withdraw and something like emptiness appears to our awareness. This non-being is, paradoxically, what allows us to experience being. Heidegger said that in moments of deep anxiety, when it feels like everything has fallen apart, the nothing reveals itself, and in that revelation, being itself becomes visible. In other words, only when we face nothingness, what has no structure, no guarantee, no certainty, can we truly sense what it means to be applied to our time. When we constantly run from silence, from not knowing, from not doing, we lose sight of meaning itself. The void isn't a problem to fix, it's an opening to what's real. The productivity trap that exiles silence. Modern life pushes us toward constant activity: produce, perform, optimize, grow. From the moment we wake up to the moment we collapse into bed, we're trapped in cycles of tasks, goals, notifications, and comparisons. In this world, silence is treated like failure. Rest looks like laziness. Idleness feels like waste. Nothingness becomes terrifying. But can there be meaning in a life that never pauses simply to be, that only does? When the value of existence is measured by output, visibility, and constant engagement, emptiness gets exiled. Heidegger reminds us that exiling emptiness means exiling our most intimate condition, our finitude, our questioning, our not knowing. Without silence, without stillness, without the courage to simply exist, we lose depth. We trade being for doing, experience for production, life for performance, reclaiming emptiness as a form of resistance. Allowing yourself to be empty isn't giving up. It's claiming your right to be human. It's seeing silence not as a failure, but as a space for listening. It's recognizing that meaning can't be built on a 30-day plan or produced like a startup. It's saying, I can stop. I can exist without goals. I can open the window without making it a ritual. I can choose not to post, not to plan. In this ability not to produce lies resistance against a culture that defines us by productivity, against systems that measure worth by output, against the mindset that turns life into a to-do list. Sometimes emptiness appears in simple moments: a walk without a podcast, an afternoon without a project, a coffee without your phone, a distracted gaze at the sky. These small pauses, seemingly meaningless, are where life regains its weight. It's in the quiet between tasks that existence deepens. It's in the dark of night, away from glowing screens, that we can feel the echo of being. The drama of silence, us and our finitude. When we allow emptiness, we're forced to face our own finitude, time slipping away, the body aging, meaning never guaranteed. That's not comfortable, but Heidegger reminds us that being toward death, signs toad, is a core structure of human existence, and only by recognizing it can we live authentically. In a world of speed, noise, and constant alerts, our awareness of finitude gets buried. The result is a hidden emptiness, that vague feeling that something's missing, but you can't name it. Accepting the right to emptiness means accepting a life that includes uncertainty, impermanence, and the absence of ready-made answers. Doing nothing as a radical act. Doing nothing sounds harmless, but in a world obsessed with doing something, it's revolutionary. When we choose to pause with awareness, when we look inward instead of reacting to external demands, we declare, I am not just my output. I am experience. I am presence. It's a refusal to be defined by productivity, the rebirth of a self that measures life not by results, but by existence itself. Rest, leisure, and free time stop being rewards for performance and become basic human rights. Silence stops being escape and becomes a way of inhabiting being. Meaninglessness stops being tragedy and becomes the soil where new meaning grows. Active emptiness, the ethics of presence. An ethics based on emptiness isn't resignation, it's awareness. To be authentic in existence means listening to what emerges in silence, responding to life not as an instant project, but as an ongoing story, accepting that not everything can be filled or explained, choosing to act with attention even without certainty, embracing anxiety not as illness, but as the threshold of transformation. This ethic doesn't flee from the world, it dwells in it, responsibly, but without the obsession for constant action. Because for Heidegger, the world isn't just a collection of tasks, it's being in the world, Dasein, open to meaning, and that meaning appears only when we stop colonizing time with goals and begin to truly inhabit the moment. How can we claim this right? Claiming the right to emptiness isn't privilege, it's necessity. In a life overloaded with stimuli, comparisons, and endless striving to be more, this right saves us. It saves us from reducing life to utility, to output, to endless measurement. It saves us from losing being to doing. In practice, turn off notifications. Don't answer right away. Allow yourself a day with no schedule. Watch the sky, the silence, the wind. Say no to the internal voice demanding constant activity. Ask yourself, what do I do when I do nothing? And listen, who am I when I'm not performing? That listening happens, paradoxically, in emptiness, in the space that doesn't need to be filled, in the time that doesn't need to be planned. A provisional conclusion. The right to emptiness is neither luxury nor weakness. It's courage. The courage to exist without guarantees, to inhabit silence, to accept that meaning isn't always ready-made. Heidegger taught that nothingness isn't absence. It's what makes being possible. And in our age of constant doing, reclaiming silence, rest, and meaninglessness is an act of philosophical resistance. When we allow emptiness to exist within us, we make room for being to reveal itself, so that life can stop being a production machine and become a genuine dwelling of existence. And that dwelling doesn't require more goals, more actions, or more noise. It only requires us to be. If this video spoke to you in any way, if it challenged you, made you uncomfortable, or simply made you stop and breathe, I just want to thank you for staying until the end. This space exists for exactly that, to think deeply about things that are often ignored in the noise of everyday life. If you believe more people should have access to this kind of content, hit the like button, share the video with someone who's also searching for meaning, and leave a comment below. How do you deal with silence? Can you allow yourself to just be still? Or do you still feel guilty when you're not doing something? Your interaction helps this channel grow and shows that there's still room for slower, more human, and more honest conversations. And of course, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and stick around, because there's much more to explore together. More videos are coming, more philosophy, more reflections, more questions without easy answers, but that change us along the way. See you in the next video. Until then, take care of your silence.